Have you ever lived in a house where a single door was enough to make you want to run away? I once thought I was lucky when I found a place so cheap it felt unreal. But on my very first night, I realized something was wrong the moment I felt the cold air rising from the basement. That wasn't a draft. It felt like breath. The basement door was always slightly open, no matter how many times I locked it, pushed it, or slammed it shut. It opened again, as if something down there wanted to come up. Every night, it was a little wider. Every night, a little clearer. And then, at some point, I understood that if I ever fell asleep, or if I ever turned off the lights, whatever was down there would finally come to the surface. The only question left was, how long had it been waiting to meet me? I moved into the house on a Friday afternoon, the air heavy with the smell of rain and the sky dim and gray, as if it already knew something was about to happen to me. The moving truck had just pulled out of the gate. I stood alone in front of the house, trying to suppress the feeling that I was about to make an irreversible mistake. I wasn't superstitious, nor was I the type to get spooked by ghost stories. But instinct is different. Instinct whispers things your rational mind doesn't want to hear. The house looked normal, but not the kind of normal that gives you comfort. It looked like a person pretending to smile to hide something horrifying inside. The once white exterior had yellowed with age, and the old wooden windows were half closed, as if someone had been watching me from inside, then retreated, just as I noticed. And at the very end of the dark hallway after I opened the front door, I saw the basement door. It sat there like a stain that couldn't be erased from a family portrait. Old, dark, and unnervingly gloomy. The landlord, a man in his 60s, with a slightly stooped back, had handed me the keys before getting into his car. But before he turned away, he looked at me, not smiling, not friendly, just serious, with bloodshot eyes that looked sleepless. He said exactly 7 words. "Don't go into the basement after midnight." I laughed, thinking he was joking. But he didn't laugh. He turned away so abruptly, I didn't even have time to ask anything. I still remember the moment he opened his car door. A gust of wind blew past, rustling the leaves. He paused, looked one last time at the basement window, and whispered softly, loud enough for me to hear but too faint to fully understand. "Don't look at it, if it looks up." When I stepped into the house, the first feeling I had wasn't excitement about a new beginning. It was intrusion. As if I had stepped into a place that didn't belong to me, and the house was watching every move I made. My footsteps echoed through the empty rooms. The echo was too loud, as if more than one person were walking. I stopped and listened, and what froze my spine was this. When I stood still, the echo stood still too. But right after that, very soft, very faint, creak, creak. A sound came from the end of the hallway, more precisely, from the basement door. The rusty hinges seemed to shift, even though I was standing more than 10 meters away. I told myself, old house things, but the cold crawling up my back refused to fade. I walked closer to check. The hallway was long, the light from the window behind me too weak, making me feel like I was stepping into the mouth of some huge creature, and the basement door was its throat. As I approached, the first thing I saw was, the basement door was slightly open, about 2 or 3 centimeters. I was sure I hadn't touched it, and I was sure that earlier, when I viewed it from the front door, it had been shut tight. The closer I got, the colder the air became, as if a draft were blowing out from the dark gap below. But it wasn't wind. It was damp, thick, like the breath of something alive down there. I placed my hand on the door, intending to close it. The door trembled under my touch, as if hesitating, or as if someone on the other side was holding it. I pushed gently. It closed. But the moment I let go, click, it opened again. Not much. Just that same small gap. Just enough to show the darkness below, thick like tar. I tried again, pushed hard. Click. It opened again. This time, the cold air blew straight against my stomach. So cold, I instinctively stepped back. I hated the feeling of being toyed with. But I hated even more the feeling that something down there was watching me. I took a deep breath, grabbed a rope from the toolbox, tied it tightly around the doorknob, pulled it taut, and secured it to a heavy table nearby. The table was solid. The rope was strong. I thought this time the door wouldn't open again. I tugged on it slightly. It held. Satisfied, I turned away. I didn't take 3 steps before. Bang. I jerked around. The basement door was still slightly open. The table had been dragged forward several centimeters. The rope was pulled so tight it was about to snap. I froze, not because the door had opened, but because I knew. For the door to open like that, someone had to pull it from the inside. The first night passed heavily. I ate a bowl of instant noodles and sat in front of the TV, but I couldn't focus on anything. I kept feeling as though a pair of eyes were watching me from the end of the hallway. Even with the living room lights on, the hallway leading to the basement remained pitch black, like a void carved out of the world. I heard the wind outside the window. I heard my own footsteps while I walked. But what made my hair stand on end was when I turned off the TV and the living room lights. Click. The basement door opened a little wider. I lived alone. No pets. No wind strong enough to move that heavy table earlier. I stood about 10 meters away, yet I could still smell the damp, cold stench drifting from below. I took a few steps closer just to see better. But the longer I stared at that thick, tar-like darkness, the more I felt my heart tighten as if being squeezed. There was a sensation, like being pulled in, as if something down there was beckoning me. I immediately turned on every light on the ground floor and ran straight into the bedroom, shut the door, locked it twice, wedged a chair under the handle. I didn't know exactly what I was afraid of, but I knew I didn't want to see that basement door again after dark. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of drag, scrape, drag, scrape, something moving slowly across the wooden floor. From the hallway, I opened my eyes. The clock read 2:41 a.m. I lay still, afraid to even breathe loudly. The sound came again. Drag. Slow, heavy. Not a rat, not a cat. Something heavier, larger, and deliberate. I slowly slid off the bed and pressed my ear to the bedroom door. Cold air seeped through the gap under the door, chilling my ankles. Then, scratch, scratch, scratch. Fingernails, or something else, lightly scraping the wall. My hand trembled as I reached for the lamp, and the moment I turned it on, the sound stopped. Complete silence. I don't know what made me do it, but I crouched down to look through the gap under the door. The dim light allowed me to see a small section of the hallway floor. I was about to stand up when, in a fraction of a second, a pale, bony finger slid past the strip of light. I jerked backward, falling onto the bed, heart pounding as if it would burst. That finger wasn't human. It was longer than normal, the joints protruding sharply, and the nail pointed as if filed down. I held my breath. No more dragging sounds. No more scraping. Just breathing. Slow, unsteady, right outside my bedroom door. I stayed awake until dawn, in silence, waiting to see whether that thing would get inside. The next day, daylight did nothing to ease my fear. If anything, it made me realize this house had far more hidden corners than I thought. The basement stayed silent, but I knew. That thing hadn't disappeared. It was only hiding, waiting for night to fall so it could continue its game. I wandered around the house, checking every door, every corner, every old cabinet. Everything was normal, except for the basement. I didn't know why, but I kept glancing back at that door, as though it were pulling me toward it. I couldn't explain the feeling of fear mixed with curiosity. The feeling you get when you stand at the edge of a cliff, knowing that if you step forward, you won't come back the same. When night came, I tried to stay calm. I made dinner, ate in the kitchen, tried not to think about the basement, but then the sound, creak, 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 echoed again. This time, louder, as if someone was slowly walking across the old wooden floor beneath me. I looked at the clock. 2:47 a.m. The exact same time I heard it before. In that moment, my body froze. I had no doubt left. The basement knew I was awake. I stood up, and my eyes accidentally met the door. It was open a little wider, like it was inviting me. My throat tightened. I didn't want to go down, but I couldn't look away. It felt like an invisible magnet was pulling me closer. I remembered what the landlord said. Don't look at it if it looks back up. I wondered, was something down there looking at me? Or was I the one looking at it? The question pushed me into a panic I'd never felt before. I backed away, but my legs felt nailed to the floor. My breath turned heavy, my heart pounding. I heard breathing, human or not, I couldn't tell. But it was close, very close, right outside my door. I retreated into the living room, trying to steady myself, forcing my breath to slow. But every time I blinked, the image of those pale, bony fingers flashed in my mind. Not human too long, joints bulging, nails razor sharp. I panted, shaking. For the first time in my life, I felt truly small in the presence of something that didn't belong to this world. I knew that if I kept hiding, it would keep coming. But if I stood up to face it, I didn't know what would happen. I sat down and opened the old journal I found in the living room cabinet. It belonged to the previous family, the youngest son, the one who went missing in 1992. The pages were yellowed, moldy, the handwriting shaky, clearly written by the boy himself. There were notes about footsteps, strange noises, and the basement door. I felt a sharp pain in my chest as I read. The boy wrote, "It doesn't like being seen. Don't turn off the lights. It will wait." I shivered. This was the reason the landlord warned me. Don't go into the basement after midnight. The second night, as darkness swallowed the house, I tried to prepare myself. I placed heavy objects in front of the basement door, but I knew weight doesn't always stop things that aren't bound by normal rules. I'd heard stories about entities that love freedom, that enjoy playing with fear, and this basement was their home. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the sounds began. Slow, dragging footsteps, heavy, uneven. I heard something scraping across the wooden floor, maybe nails, maybe feet, its rhythm matching my breath. I got up, my legs trembling, my eyes fixed on the door. I heard another creak, the door rattling slightly. Pressing my ear against my room door, I felt my heartbeat slam against my ribs. The air thickened, freezing, as if only my breath and the breathing outside the hallway existed. Then, I saw it, a flickering shadow under the door. No clear shape, just long, thin, moving unnaturally. I stumbled back. A pale, bony finger slid through the gap, ice cold, joints sharp, nail glinting. My pulse exploded. I fell into a chair, paralyzed. The moment stretched endlessly. I heard its breath, moist, cold, rising from something deep beneath the floor. I didn't know what to do. All I knew was I had to survive the night. I made a decision. I couldn't run forever. I had to understand. For the first time, I looked into the basement. My shaking flashlight beam cut through the air, dust swirling, the weak light unable to push back the thick darkness below. Something was waiting down there, silent but aware. I stared down. It felt like the basement itself was alive. The damp, heavy air felt like it wanted to swallow me whole. I heard the dragging sound. Closer. My feet glued to the floor. I turned to run when the beam flickered over. Another hand appearing from the shadows, grabbing the edge of a step and vanishing instantly. I screamed, but only my own trembling breath echoed down the hallway. No reply. No one else here. I locked myself in my room. Layer after layer. Sat on my bed, shaking, trying to write in the journal, but the pen slipped. My hand was too weak. I didn't know if it saw me, or if it was just waiting for me. That night, I understood one thing. The basement wasn't just a storage place. It was a living entity. It knew me, watched me, sensed my fear. And I was its newest prey, just like the boy from 1992. I tried to close my eyes, but the image of that pale hand wouldn't fade. I stayed awake until morning. Sunlight brought no safety. I knew tomorrow night would be even worse. The third night, I no longer had the strength to sleep. I no longer had the courage to walk anywhere in the house once darkness settled in. Every creak of the wooden floor, every faint click of a door, felt like it could rip my heart straight out of my chest. I began to understand that the basement wasn't just part of the house. It was the dwelling place of an entity, a creature that knew I was here. I don't remember how long I sat in the living room chair, only that the darkness seemed endless, swallowing the entire house. The flashlight trembled in my hand, its beam far too weak to push back the heavy darkness below the basement. Then I heard it, the dragging. Slow, deliberate, each pull heavier than the last. My heartbeat spun out of control. I knew I couldn't hide forever. I had to go down there. I had to see. I had to know. I walked toward the basement door, each step feeling like it dragged me deeper into a pit. When my hand touched the doorknob, a freezing shock spread up my arm, rattling my bones. I forced myself to push the door open. It creaked, revealing only a thin crack, but the darkness beneath it was thick like ink. A burst of cold air blew directly into my face, wet, heavy. I inhaled, trying to steady myself. I pointed the flashlight toward the wooden steps. Dust rose like mist. Nothing appeared. I told myself, it's just darkness, just the dark. But then the light slid across something that moved. A small, low black shape darted across the basement floor. I stumbled back, my eyes blinking rapidly, my breath choking in my chest. The shadow vanished instantly. I stepped onto the stairs. Each step groaned under my weight, sending shivers through me. The air grew damp, thick, carrying a faint rot like mummified flesh. I swept the light across the basement. What I saw had no name. Long claw marks carved into the walls, fresh ones slicing over old ones, and smeared writing one sentence scrawled over and over. Don't turn off the light. I stepped back. My pulse hammered. I had no doubt left. Whatever lived here wasn't just alive. It knew I was watching, and it wanted me to obey. I moved deeper in, the flashlight shaking wildly. A warped wooden table leaned to the side, a chair overturned as if someone had fled in a panic. Then I heard it again, the creaking. Closer this time, like something rising from behind me. I spun around, nothing but thick darkness, but a cold rush crawled down my spine, gripping my limbs, squeezing out every last drop of rational thought. A pale hand slid through a narrow crack in the basement wall. The fingers were long, the joints bulging, the nails sharp as blades. I staggered backward, almost falling, my heart splitting open. I knew I had no choice. I had to go deeper. I had to face it. I walked slowly, each step deliberate, my light sweeping across the room, the cold pressed against my skin, and the dragging sound kept echoing, closer, heavier. A foul smell drifted through the air, blood, or something old, decayed. I approached a dark corner where the claw marks were thickest. The scribbled words old and new seemed to pulse in the trembling light. It waits. It doesn't forget. It loves to play. A faint noise, almost a giggle, floated from the far end of the basement. I turned the light toward it, the beam shaking uncontrollably, revealing a low, warped form shifting like liquid. I recoiled, and then I heard the breathing. Breathing like a person, but not a person. Wet, icy, urgent. I knew I was afraid. I knew I couldn't run. I knew that if I did run, it would enjoy it even more. I stood still, gasping, my eyes pinned to the darkness. The figure appeared just as I reached the last step, thin, hunched, its arms long with pointed bones. It stayed motionless, watching me, its breath spilling into the air like fog, choking me with dread. I knew what I had to do. Keep the light on, shine it across the entire basement. Let no corner go dark. But the beam trembled so violently, it only revealed one thing. The shadow was gone. I froze, my pulse roaring in my ears. I knew this creature didn't want to harm me immediately. It only wanted to make me afraid. And it had succeeded. I turned around. The basement door closed by itself, soft, effortless, but I knew it would open again. It always did. I climbed the stairs, returned to the living room, and sat rigidly, trembling. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't rest. All I knew was that tomorrow night, everything would be worse. The basement never sleeps. And I know now, I will never sleep peacefully again. I stayed awake all night, sitting in the chair, listening to every sound in the old house. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. I knew the basement was never silent. It only waited. Every gust of wind slipping through the window cracks, every leaf rustling outside made me jump. Around midnight, I heard the familiar footsteps again. No longer soft, no longer the faint dragging sound from before. This time it was something clear, heavy, moving beneath the basement, echoing through the entire house. My heart went wild. I picked up the flashlight, ready to face whatever it was. But my hands trembled so much, I could barely hold it. I knew I had to go down again. I knew that if I didn't confront it, I would lose my mind. But stepping onto those cold wooden stairs made me shiver uncontrollably. The moment my foot touched the first step, the air thickened around me cold enough to stab through bone, damp and foul. I heard the creaking again, keeping pace with my steps. But this time, the breathing was unmistakable. It was almost right behind me. I turned around. No one. Only the suffocating dark. But I knew it was watching. I shone the flashlight across the basement. The claw marks on the walls stood out more clearly now. The scribbles I'd seen before had multiplied strange symbols, frantic and uneven. I bent down and found old scraps of paper fallen from the corner. A boy's diary dated 1992. I opened it, my voice shaking as I read. It doesn't like being seen. It watches. It knows when I'm scared. Don't turn off the light. A chill surged through me. This thing knew I was reading, knew what I was thinking, knew I was afraid. A sudden sound click, creak, very close. I spun around, the flashlight trembling in my grip. A small, thin shadow slipped along the wall. I couldn't see it clearly. Every time the light touched it, it vanished. My heart pounded violently. I stumbled backward and fell, stunned. The room seemed to shrink, as if the basement itself wanted to swallow me whole. The dragging sound grew louder, heavier. And then I understood. It was playing with me. It enjoyed my fear. It savored every desperate heartbeat. I forced myself up, trembling, trying to breathe. I had to face it. I turned the flashlight to full brightness, sweeping the basement. The shadow appeared this time clearer. A small, gaunt figure, arms unnaturally long, nails sharp, moving in a way no human body should. I realized it wasn't human, but it was intelligent. I grabbed my phone, trying to call the landlord. The moment I lifted it, dead. The screen black like a mirror, reflecting my terrified face. I tried turning it on full battery, but no signal. Impossible. This thing could control electronics? Then I heard a laugh, soft, twisted, right next to my ear. I spun around. No one. But the flashlight hit a stair, and I saw it. A pale hand. Not resting on the steps, but reaching out of the darkness itself. Fingers long. Joints swollen. Nails like blades. I backed away. The hand vanished as the light moved. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't run anymore. There were no choices left. I had to face it directly. I walked deeper into the basement. Each step made the air heavier. I shone the flashlight in every direction. Fresh claw marks covered the walls. A message, written in dried blood. "It wants you to stay." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep going. One more step and I heard footsteps behind me. Not the old heavy ones, but quick, gliding, as if it floated just above the ground. I turned. Nothing. But its breath touched the back of my neck, cold, damp, heavy. I screamed. The sound echoed wildly through the basement. But no one answered. It only laughed light, mocking, worming into my bones, with terror I had never felt before. My legs shook. My heart felt like it would burst. Then, the basement door swung shut behind me. Not from wind, not from force. It simply closed. I felt its presence, closer than ever. I realized it didn't want to kill me yet. It wanted to play. It wanted my fear, and it had already won. I turned around, stepping deeper into the room. Dust swirled. The claw marks grew thicker. The writings on the wall more frantic. "You can't run. There is no escape." I understood then. This basement was not a room. It was a living thing. It felt me. It fed on my fear. Something moved behind me quick. Low. Close. I spun around, the light catching a small, hunched shape, bones protruding beneath its skin, eyes glowing like amber stones in the dark. It stood motionless, watching, its breath ragged. I realized it had once played with the boy from 1992, fed on his fear, and now it wanted me. I stood there trembling, heart pounding. The basement never sleeps, and I knew if I wanted to survive, I had to find a way out, but escaping wouldn't save me. It knew I was here. It knew I was afraid, and it would never forgive me for that fear. I held my breath. The flashlight flickered across the stairs, the walls. The creature slid through the darkness like liquid, moving toward me. I felt its cold breath on my face, wet and foul, and heard its twisted laughter echo through the basement. Then I understood. I had stepped into a game with something not of this world. I was the prey, and the basement was its playground. The sound of its laughter still echoed through the basement. The noise was both close and distant, as if it spread into every gap between my bones. I stood frozen, my heart pounding violently, the flashlight trembling in my hand as its beam flickered across the shifting darkness. The damp, moldy air felt thick enough to choke me. This entity didn't approach me in any normal way. It fed on my fear, turning it into a pull, dragging me deeper into the basement. I stepped back and felt my heel hit something hard on the floor, the shattered pieces of the old table from before. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the panic pressed so tightly against my ribs that my fingers shook, the flashlight nearly slipping from my hand. I heard footsteps closer now, but not on the wooden floor. They slid through the air, light, yet urgent, following the rhythm of my heartbeat. I turned, the flashlight beam sweeping the darkness, and saw a short, thin shape, unclear, but with protruding joints and long, sharp, glinting nails. I tried to speak, but my voice was hoarse. "Where? Who's there?" Silence, only breathing, and the dragging sound, getting closer. It didn't respond. It knew exactly what I said, but it refused to speak. I forced myself to move forward, deeper toward the center of the basement. Dust swirled in the flashlight beam. I saw new scratches along the walls, deeper, more numerous, along with lines of messy text written in a dark reddish color. Don't trust the light. No one escapes. I inhaled sharply. My heartbeat hammered. I felt something press close behind me. A cold, wet breath against my neck, freezing like ice. I knew that if I turned around, I would face it directly. But I had no choice. I had to face it. I stood still, the flashlight sweeping the room. It appeared, vague but real, short, thin, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Its arms were long, its joints sharp, and its nails pointed like blades. It stood still, watching me. I felt intelligence in its gaze. It knew I was afraid. It knew exactly what I would do. A soft, chilling laugh echoed beside my ear. I jerked backward, stumbling over a piece of broken wood. This thing, it approached me without ever touching the ground. I swallowed hard, my hand shaking, the light shining onto its face, and I saw something far worse. It could change shape. It wasn't fixed. It was thin and small, but its form shifted constantly, like living liquid. I screamed, but the sound bounced helplessly across the empty basement. The creature didn't flinch. It enjoyed it, dancing through the shadows with delight. I realized I needed a strategy. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. It would hunt me, toy with me, until I collapsed. I needed to communicate. I needed to make a deal. I'll do what you want, I stammered. I didn't even know if it understood. I stepped forward, raising my hand slightly, as if signaling peace. The flashlight illuminated its eyes. It stopped moving. Silence. I continued. I don't want to hurt anything. I just want to survive. The silence stretched so long it felt as if time stopped. And then a sound, so faint, it barely qualified as a whisper. Fear is yours. We share it. My heart skipped a beat. I realized I had just been chosen to live, but with a price. A pact with something not of this world, something for whom the basement was merely a doorway. I didn't know the terms. I didn't know the consequences, but I knew that if I refused, it wouldn't let me leave alive. I accept, I whispered, trembling. The shadow circled me slowly. Its cold breath coated my skin. I felt its strength, its complete dominion over the basement. It came closer, its bony joints protruding as one long, sharp nail brushed my arm. A piercing chill shot through me. I tried not to scream. I tried not to pull away. The moment stretched on endlessly. I felt as though the entire basement was swallowing me whole. Then, the entity withdrew. The shadow slipped back into the darkness. The footsteps, the dragging sounds, the breathing, all faded. I remained still, shaking, barely able to breathe. The pact had been made. I was alive. But the fear didn't disappear. It still lingered. It still watched. It was only waiting for the next night to continue its game. I climbed the stairs and returned to my room, locked the door with every lock I had, wedged a chair against it. I sat down, trying to calm myself. But the image of that pale hand, those sharp nails, those bone-like joints, it stayed burned in my mind. The flashlight flickered in my hand, and I knew one thing: the basement never sleeps. And neither will I. That night, I stayed awake, watching every corner of the house, every gust of wind, every creaking door, every rustling leaf outside made me jump. I realized the pact didn't protect me. It only prolonged things. It stretched out the fear. The entity still watched me. It still toyed with me. I looked toward the basement, where darkness pooled like ink. I knew that if I went down again, I would face it fully. This time, it wouldn't be a test. It would be the real game. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the truth. There was no escape. The basement never closes. And somehow, I have become a part of it. Night 5. I no longer hid. I knew the basement was calling me. The footsteps, the dragging sounds, the cold, raspy breathing echoed through the house non-stop like a twisted symphony written just for me. I prepared what I could. A flashlight, my phone, even though it had no signal, and a mind desperately trying to cling to survival. I walked to the basement door. My trembling hand touched the icy doorknob, a shock running down my spine like a jolt of electricity. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The basement waited for me. Dust floated thick in the air, scratches on the walls glowing under the flashlight beam. The smell of mold and something rotten filled the room, making me want to vomit. I stepped onto the stairs. Each step creaked heavily, echoing my pounding heartbeat. The footsteps, the dragging, the wheezing breath followed closely, closing in, pushing me toward the corner of the basement. I froze. My flashlight trembled as its beam hit the center of the room, and I saw it. Short, thin, constantly shifting in shape, long arms, protruding joints, sharp nails, glinting like metal, eyes glowing like amber stones in the darkness. It stood still, watching me, cold breath pouring into the air around us, making my skin crawl. I realized then this wasn't some mindless creature. It was intelligent, aware, and it knew exactly how to play with my fear. I bit my lip, trying to keep myself steady. I stepped forward, aiming the flashlight directly at its face. It didn't react. It just stood there. A horrifying silence settled in. I understood. If I surrendered to fear, I would lose control completely. I'm not afraid anymore, I said, my voice shaking but trying to stay firm. It tilted its head. A soft, eerie laugh echoed out, drawn out, and mocking. I felt cold air radiating from it, as if the entire basement was breathing along with it. I took another step. It backed away slightly, then moved forward again. A never-ending game. I remembered the boy's journal from 1992. It said, "If it sees you aren't afraid, it will retreat. But don't look down. Don't turn away. Just face it." I lifted my head, shining the flashlight directly into its eyes. It froze. I felt a powerful energy radiating from the creature, as if everything in the room bent toward it. I realized I was standing before something supernatural. Something that not only controlled the basement, but could reach directly into my emotions. I inhaled sharply. A thought flashed in my mind. I needed to communicate. I lowered the flashlight, bowed my head slightly, and spoke, my voice trembling but determined. "I don't want to fight. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to survive." In that moment, the basement trembled lightly. Not footsteps, not wind, a vibration from the floor itself. It reacted. This thing understood me. It floated closer, not touching the ground. Its long hand, sharp nails, and bulging joints hovered only a few steps away. Its cold breath touched my neck, but this time, I didn't step back. I stood straight, staring directly at it. "I accept," I whispered, my voice shaking but firm. The shadow withdrew slightly. It moved fast, sliding through the air like liquid, circling around me. The moment stretched on, and I felt the pact become real. I survived, but the basement didn't let me go. The creature still existed, still watching. It wanted me to know the fear would never disappear. I stood there, shaking, the flashlight illuminating scratches, words, and scattered pieces of paper. I understood something terrible. The basement wasn't just a room. It was alive. A sentient entity that fed on fear, and I had become a piece of its endless game. Suddenly, a scratching sound echoed from a dark corner. I turned, but nothing was there. The air thickened around me. The cold wrapped itself around my body. I realized, even with the pact, the basement had more trials, more games. It wouldn't stop. It was watching, waiting, calculating. I climbed the stairs. Each step was a battle against fear, but I didn't dare turn back. I knew that if I looked over my shoulder, I would break, and the creature would sense it immediately. I reached the upper floor, closed the door, locked it multiple times. I collapsed into a seat, my back drenched in cold sweat. I knew that tonight I survived, but I also knew the basement never sleeps. And somehow, I had become part of it. Each night, the game would continue. I had to learn to live with fear, to face it, to accept that there was no escape. The basement never closes, and I will never be at peace. Seventh night, everything was silent, but I knew it was only the calm before the storm. The basement was waiting for me. The footsteps, the dragging sounds, the cold breaths, all of them grew clearer, sharper, heavier. The smell of damp rot and iron stench thickened the air until I could barely breathe. I stood before the basement door, my hand trembling as I gripped the handle. The flashlight flickered, reflecting off the deep scratches on the wall. I knew that tonight, I no longer had a choice. I had to go down. I had to face the entity that had followed me for nights. The door creaked open. A wave of cold air hit my face, making me shiver from bone to bone. I stepped down the stairs, each step pulling me further into an endless pit. The footsteps followed, close, steady, synchronized with my own, as if the basement itself were alive and breathing with the creature. I turned on every flashlight, shining them across the room, but the darkness remained thick, shifting, waiting to swallow me. It appeared, a low, thin shape, eyes glowing like twin amber stones, arms long, joints protruding, claws sharp as polished bone. It stood still, its raspy breaths coating the air. I realized it had grown stronger in this darkness, faster, sharper, and it knew exactly how to play with me. My heart pounded uncontrollably. I forced myself to stay calm. I remembered the boy's journal from 1992. If you want to survive, don't be afraid, but be ready for the worst. Tonight was the night. No running, no hiding. I walked toward the center of the basement, flashlight pointed directly at its face. The moment stretched into infinity. It tilted its head, and then a soft, distorted laugh slipped out. A sound that intertwined with the dragging echo of the basement itself. I took another step. It moved closer without touching the floor, sliding like liquid shadow. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I am not afraid anymore. I will face you. A cold breath blew against my face. Wet, heavy. It was standing right in front of me. Long fingers, sharp claws, joints jutting outward. I did not step back. The flashlight hit its eyes head on. I stared straight at it. The memory of our earlier pact pulsed in my mind. Fear was its power. But tonight, I would not fear. The creature warped, its body flowing like living liquid. It glided around me, eyes glowing, bones shifting, claws glinting, closing the distance. But this time, I stood firm. I exhaled hard, raising the beam of light. It cut through the darkness, splitting the shadows like fragile mist. I'm not running. I'm not afraid. I face you. My voice echoed across the basement. It froze, did not move. Its breath filled the space, but something held it back. I realized. My fear, night after night, had fed it. But now, with that fear gone, my presence challenged the very power of the basement. I stepped closer. It slid backward, shifting shape rapidly, like a fluid creature struggling to decide what it was. The room vibrated. The floor creaked. The scratches on the walls seemed to twitch under the light. I knew this was the final confrontation between a human and the entity of the dark. A sound floated through the air, faint but unmistakable. A laugh, a gasp, and then a whisper. It whispered my name, not through sound, but through sensation. I felt it in my chest, my pulse, my memories, as if the basement had recorded every fear I ever had. I stepped forward again. The flashlight hit its eyes. It went silent. The darkness around us peeled away, weakening, dissolving into thin shapes that no longer had the strength to attack. I realized my fear was gone, and with it, part of its power. I inhaled deeply and moved closer. Its long hand, its sharp claws, reached forward. I didn't move. The flashlight burned bright, and the darkness shattered. It retreated, slipping back into the deepest corner of the basement. I stood there, chest heaving, heart pounding. I had won, but not completely. The basement fell silent. Only my breathing echoed through the room. The entity still existed, but my fear no longer fed it. And that shift alone had shaken the basement's power. I climbed the stairs, shutting the door behind me, locking it layer after layer. Cold sweat dripped down my back, my hands trembling. I survived, but I knew one thing. The basement never sleeps. It still watches. It still waits. And somehow, I had become part of its world. There was no escape, but at least I was no longer afraid. The basement never closes, and I, from now on, will walk with the darkness at every step, but with new courage, knowing I will face it, and I am no longer an easy prey. 8th night. I stayed awake all night, the flickering lights in my room warning me of something coming. The basement was silent, but I could feel a simmering force boiling beneath it. The footsteps, the dragging sounds, the cold breaths. They still echoed in my mind, like the basement had its own heartbeat. I knew that tonight I would face the entity completely. No more running, no more delaying the pact. I prepared everything. The strongest flashlight I had, every light in the house turned on. My phone, even though there was no signal, and a piece of cloth to cover my eyes, in case it tried to play its illusion tricks. The basement door opened, and a cold wave hit my skin like icy needles. I inhaled deeply and stepped down. Every step brought back the fears of all the previous nights. I switched on my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. The darkness was dense, suffocating. But this time, the thin, distorted shape didn't appear immediately. The basement was empty. Yet the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. A faint sound broke the silence. A scraping, like a hand dragging across wood. I turned quickly, the flashlight cutting through the dark, and saw new marks on the wall. Deeper, redder, as if the basement itself was whispering to me. No one escapes. I took a few more steps, and then it appeared. Not blurry, not half-formed. Tonight, the entity stood before me fully revealed. Low, thin, long arms, protruding joints, sharpened claws, eyes glowing like burning amber. It didn't move. It just stood there, breathing heavily, filling the room with cold air. I exhaled sharply, steadying myself. The flashlight shone directly into its eyes. The moment stretched endlessly, time hanging still. I realized something terrifying. The basement wasn't just a room. It was a living entity, capable of feeling, manipulating, and feeding on human fear. I had been its prey. Now, I was its challenger. I am not afraid anymore. My voice trembled, but remained firm. It tilted its head, a soft, warped laugh echoing through the space. It knew I was defying it. The basement trembled, Dust rising, scratches expanding, the bloody markings on the wall writhing. As if reacting to my courage, I stepped closer, flashlight straight in its face. It slid rapidly across the floor, its form shifting like living liquid. But this time, I did not back away. I looked straight at it and felt something shift. A part of its darkness, its power, was being restrained. I understood. Fear was its only source of strength. And by refusing it, I was stripping away its dominance. A whisper seeped through the basement. Not as sound, but as sensation. It whispered my name through memories, through every fear I had ever felt. I realized the basement didn't just feed on present fear. It carried the fears of everyone who had ever stepped inside. I moved closer. The beam of light forced the darkness to retreat. The creature circled around me quickly, sliding from corner to corner, but not daring to attack. If I had enough courage, the basement couldn't consume me. I know your secret. I'm not afraid anymore. I will survive. My voice wavered, but it held. The basement suddenly shook violently. The darkness shattered into fragments. Scratches stretched across the walls. Old notes and torn journal pages floated through the air. As if dancing in the flashlight's glow, the entity stood still, eyes glowing, then slowly withdrew into the deepest part of the basement. Silence fell. Only my breathing remained. I knew I had survived tonight, but the basement hadn't let me go. It still existed, still watched, still waited. The basement never closes. It is a living creature, one that senses fear, collects it, feeds on it, plays with it. And I had become part of its world. I climbed the stairs, shut the door, locked it again and again. Cold sweat soaked my back, my hands trembling. Fear didn't vanish, but I had learned to face it. The basement still existed. The darkness still breathed. But this time, I was not easy prey. I knew, each night, the basement would wait. But now, I was ready. I faced the darkness, and the light within me was finally strong enough not to be swallowed. The ninth night, the basement was no longer just a room. It had become its own world, existing parallel to mine. I stood before the door, my hand trembling around the handle. Beneath it, I could feel the heartbeat of the basement, not a human heartbeat, but the pulse of a living entity. Footsteps, dragging sounds, cold breaths, all blending into a haunting symphony I had memorized by now. I knew this would be the final night. I had to face it completely, no more hiding, no more delayed bargains. I turned on my strongest flashlight and stepped carefully down the stairs. The basement was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat echoing through every brick. The darkness was suffocating, but this time, I was ready. It appeared. Low, thin, with glowing amber eyes, long arms, protruding joints, sharp claws. It stood still in the center of the basement, stronger and more imposing than ever. I realized, tonight, it no longer wanted to play chase. It wanted the final test, or the end. "I'm here to finish this," I whispered, my voice shaking but firm. The moment stretched endlessly. The beam of my flashlight reflected in its eyes, cold breaths spreading through the room. It moved swiftly like liquid circling me, but it did not attack. I stood my ground, holding on to the courage inside me. This time, fear had lost its power. A whisper rose not in words, but in sensation. "You have learned to face me." I understood the basement was testing me. It unleashed all of its strength, thick darkness, distorted sounds, shifting shadows to see whether I would break or continue to stand. I stepped into the center of the basement. My flashlight shone straight into its eyes. The darkness vibrated. Scratches on the walls twisted, and crimson markings writhed like living snakes. I took a deep breath and said, my voice trembling but steady, I am not afraid. I'm standing here, and I won't run anymore." The entity stood silent, then slowly retreated into the deepest part of the basement. The space seemed to compress. The darkness loosened into fragments. I felt it. The basement had recognized my strength, my courage. It could not attack what did not fear it. Suddenly, the basement shook violently. Dust exploded into the air. My flashlight revealed strange figures like the souls of those who entered before me. I understood. The basement stored every fear it had consumed. But tonight, I refused to give mine. I climbed the stairs without looking back. I knew it was still there, but its power had weakened. At the top, I slammed the door shut and locked every bolt. Sweat poured down my face. My heart pounded hard, but it no longer trembled. I had survived. I had faced the darkness, faced my fear, and somehow claimed a piece of the basement for myself. But the basement was not done. I could feel it, watching, lingering, existing, not to harm me now, but to remind me that darkness always exists. I learned something important. Fear is powerful only when you allow it to be. And when you face it, even in the thickest darkness, the light inside you can cut through. The basement would never truly close. It existed, but now I knew how to live with it. I was no longer prey. I was the challenger. And from now on, every step and every breath would be alert but not afraid. I understood. The basement is a part of me, and I am a part of it. A wordless pact was formed, not for sacrifice, but for coexistence. I looked down into the darkness below, deep and heavy, yet it no longer terrified me. I inhaled sharply, closed my eyes, and realized sometimes facing the darkness is the only way to truly see the light. The basement never closes. But now, I've learned how to walk in the dark without being swallowed. I opened my eyes, the trembling beam of my flashlight cutting across the room, and understood one thing clearly. I was still alive, and I had won. The story, The Basement That Never Closes, is not just a chilling experience. It is also a journey of self-discovery through darkness and fear. The basement, with its powerful supernatural entity, symbolizes the hidden fears within each of us, those things we often avoid, run from, or deny. The main character endures night after night of horror, confronting every step, every cold breath, and ultimately realizes that true strength does not come from avoidance, but from the ability to stand firm in the face of fear. From a personal perspective, the story reminds us that in life, everyone has their own basement challenges, pressures, and deep-seated fears. Only by daring to face, accept, and learn to manage them can we truly grow. Life may not be easy, but courage and determination can help us overcome situations that seem impossible. Just like the protagonist in the story, we can find light amid darkness and learn to control our fears instead of being controlled by them. The profound lesson is this: facing your fears is the only way to free yourself and uncover your hidden strength. Applied to real life, this means that instead of avoiding difficult tasks, risky decisions, or mental challenges, we should learn to stay calm, observe, and act with courage. Each time we confront our fears, we grow more confident and resilient. So, what about your fears in life? Are you willing to face them? Share your thoughts in the comments below, so that everyone can discuss and learn from each other's experiences. If you found this content helpful and want to support the channel in creating more thrilling, spine-chilling stories, make sure to subscribe today. There are many more haunting After Dark tales waiting for you to explore.